Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates, an online investigative show where I'll be covering conspiracy theories, hidden history, true crime, and other current events. Tonight on the show, we have a very special guest. Her name is Camille Blinstrub, and she has some very interesting information. She has been a researcher for decades, and she covered some very interesting topics having to do with a group of followers of supposed Christians that were founded in Chicago and were named the Jesus Society USA. Camille Blinstrub, tell me about your book.
My book is called Cornerstone and Friends, which is a book about Jesus People USA in Chicago.
Okay, Jesus People in Chicago, thank you. And kind of its connections to all these different individuals who may be familiar to you, definitely familiar to me in my research on the West Memphis 3. I've come across these things. But Camille, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Well,
great.
Thank you.
So if you can just give us a little background. I suspect many of the listeners have not heard of your name or your book or your research. So if you could please go in detail about your background, I'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for your work. I think very highly of your work, your book on Crowley, and I use the American pronunciation.
No problem.
And I was explaining to you when we became friends on Facebook that I was going to run out and buy your book on the West Memphis 3, as they've been dubbed by satanic sympathizers, I call them now, because I had just read Professor Ross Chiat's book called The Witch Hunt Narrative.
Right.
And it so convinced me that the whole satanic panic thing of the 90s was really false. And it made me want to buy your book.
Interesting. Very interesting. Did you come across my book, like researching Mr. Chiat's book? Or how did you come across it, on Amazon?
On Amazon, because I was looking for books on Crowley. I bought your book on Crowley, and I wanted very much to buy your West Memphis book, and I read all the reviews. And of course, I had a budget, and frankly, I have to admit, to a certain degree, as much as I know about Satanism and as much as I know about the deniers of Satanism, I still must have bought into some of their stuff because I decided against buying your book.
Interesting. Well, there was, I mean, I've been basically trolled, gang-stalked on Amazon, and they've criticized my book in every way, shape, or form. Granted, I'm a self-published author, so, you know, there are some typos and some things, but I don't think the actual research that I put into the book has ever been questioned. And a lot of people just write very specious, deceptive statements like, oh, there's no proof in the book that there's any Satanism, when it's almost on every page. Like, that's basically the entire concern of the book. The devil worship is in the title. So it's silly to do it, but I think that it's had an effect. I've seen these people, you know, I think, unfortunately, if you don't know the background of my experience with the West Memphis 3, you might actually take what they say at face value. But, so, unfortunately, I have a serious problem with Amazon's recording or point system, their 5-point system, because almost anybody can get on there and just have an agenda and gang stalk you, like I've had. So, you know, it's unfortunate.
Well, actually, the reviews were so complimentary, the ones that I read. That wasn't exactly my point. My point was Amazon made me want to buy your book. It was just the budget, but I realized after reading Ross Chiat's book that I had been brainwashed. As much as I know, having written my own book about the naysayers, the people that say Satanism and pedophilia is not a problem, I had still been influenced by them. And, you know, it was a budgetary thing, as I said. But it just shocks me. His book, which came out in, I think, 2014, It just, he drove every nail into the coffin of these people. They are the biggest bunch of liars. I cannot believe what they have done.
Can you provide a synopsis and what you learned from Ross Cheat's book? He was just a little background on Mr. Cheat is that he is actually a very respectable scholar in institutions. I believe he has a law degree from Berkeley, and he teaches at Brown on a wide variety of subjects. I tried to get in contact with him to discuss the book. He never, unfortunately, returned my calls, but I really wanted to talk about it. So if you could provide a synopsis and what the book's thesis is and what his conclusions are, that would be great.
Well, I probably should back up briefly and say that I wrote a book with basically the same idea as his.
What was the title of that again?
My book was called Cornerstone and Friends, and I wrote it in 1991 and 92. It was not published, but the point was that I was pursuing a bunch of naysayers, or I would call them sympathizers of pedophilia, sympathizers of Satanism, people that are always bandying about saying that there's a satanic panic.
Right.
And I tracked down all these people in 92 in the Christian circles that I was in.
Can you name some names?
Sure. The biggest one would be Debbie Nathan, who's a writer, and Ross Cheat exposes her too.
Interesting.
I also wrote about Ralph Underwager, who's notorious. He's dead, thank God. Notorious defender of pedophiles in court.
He popped up in the McMartin case, right?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. But he's very famous because he eventually blew his own cover and was interviewed in a Dutch pedophile magazine called Padika, saying that pedophilia may be God's will for you. So this interview was just outrageous, and he lost a lot of respect after that, but the damage was done. So it was Debbie Nathan, Ken Lanning, you know about him.
No, Ken Lanning. Ken Lanning, just to let the audience know, Ken Lanning popped up in the West Memphis 3 case. They reference Ken Lanning's report, the so-called highly touted Ken Lanning report that claims that there actually is no satanic or occult influence crimes, which is a total joke. Sorry.
Right. Well, anyway, I wrote this book in 92, and it was mostly dealing with Christian magazines that were telling people not to worry about Satanism, that it was an overblown problem, etc. And then he wrote this book in 2014, and he didn't mention he mentioned some of the same people, but he mentioned a whole bunch of new people, like Dorothy Rabinowitz, Debbie Nathan, etc., Jeffrey Victor. But the point was he had the luxury, he had more skill than me as well, but he had time, he had decades time had passed. And he was able to prove all the things that I was trying to prove, but much more successfully. And that is why I contacted you.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure Ralph Underwager popped up in McMartin, but we'll get to that later. So,
okay.
You wrote the book about the Cornerstone. So, can you talk a little bit about Cornerstone and their friends?
Sure. I am 65 years old. I was one of the ringleaders of the counterculture due to the fact that my parents were in the music business. I lived in England during Beatlemania, before Beatlemania even peaked in England.
So the early 60s?
Yes. My stepfather worked for Capitol Records, which meant that he met the Beatles. So I was right on the front line of the rock thing. So I was one of the first hippies in the United States. And then by the time I was 17, 18, 19, I got straight and became a Christian. And I saw the problems inherent in the hippie movement, which that's a whole other topic of interest, and I know you know a lot about that, like the Laurel Canyon thing and all that. So there were Jesus freaks in those days, and there was the Children of God, who has been proven with beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were into pedophilia.
Right. And that was guy's name was Berg, B-E-R-G.
Correct, David Berg, right.
And that was like River Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix came out of them, and they definitely had pedophilia was part of the entire group, as well as all kinds of sexual perversions. They had this thing where they would bring in new converts through flirty fishing, which was the women would kind of attract them, and that was how they went on. But I don't think that the totality of their perversity was realized until more recently. But
yes, there's a book called Jesus Freaks, and I forget the author's name, but one of the kids from one of the high-ranking little princes, the heir apparent of the Children of God, he actually killed one of the I think he killed his mother and something else, right? He killed his nanny. He was abused by many women, and he went after them, and he killed one, and then he killed himself. And so it's Don Lattin, Lattin. So in the early counterculture thing, there was the Children of God, and they are linked with Jesus People USA, which was Chicago-based. And even the Manson family can really be tied. These people can be loosely tied together, but there are tighter connections actually between Children of God and Jesus People USA. But it wouldn't matter anyway, because Jesus People USA has now been
disbanded,
charged with child sexual abuse of members, and there's a big case going on with that.
Is it current? Is it a current case?
There's a movie out by one of the kids that was raised in that group. It's called No Place to Call Home. His name is J.M. Prater, Jamie Prater. I don't know what's going on with the case.
Gotcha. And can you go in detail about the Cornerstone and the Jesus people that you were talking about? Can you talk about how they were, where they started, and how they grew and how big they got?
Sure. Okay. They started in California. They have California tie-ins, but this particular group started in Milwaukee. Their first leader was named John Heron, Sr. He was kicked out for sexual immorality. His wife, Dawn Heron, I did an interview with her. I knew her, not him. I seem to remember from my interview with her that her parents owned or worked in an orphanage, which gives me pause, considering what followed.
And this is Milwaukee again?
Yeah, Milwaukee, and then they moved to Chicago in about I began to see them on the streets of Chicago around 1970, 71.
Interesting.
70.
And how would they recruit? Would they recruit on the street?
Yes.
Gotcha.
And there were many really sincere people, which is how these cults operate.
Yeah, I almost joined them.
Yeah. My first husband was a member. He lived with them. They had a commune. They started off, with a school bus, just like Charlie Manson. And I'm not saying, but there are similarities. Right. They started off with a school bus, maybe 50 people. They moved into a church basement in Chicago, and they grew, and they got politically connected. The people that, if you joined them, you lived with them. The food was bad. The lodging was bad. But they were considered the Green Berets of Christianity.
Interesting. And what was their differentiation, or what was the selling point of the leaders to new proselytes or converts?
First of all, Jesus, because a lot of us really, really wanted out of the drugs and the Altamont, things like that. We knew that was not going well, right?
Right.
So it was a genuine desire for a lot of us that really wanted to turn away from the drug world and serve God and do something with our lives.
And so they were politically active. Did that mean kind of like Jim Jones, like relationships with mayors and?
Oh yes, absolutely. Let me just add one thing though. We all have a pride factor. At least I think I do. I think people can be drawn by. There was a thing of if you join us, you're going to be a Green Beret for Christ. You're not just going to be the average pew warmer. You're going to be something special. And also, the other drawing thing was that you could keep your long hair, and a lot of your culture, they had Christian. They were part of the original Christian rock movement.
Interesting. And what kind of bands were they associated with, or what type of music?
They actually, I helped promote their original band, Resurrection Band, and they started off and became very, very popular in the 80s and 90s, and even now, I think there's one guy still playing.
Interesting. And so the group did it ever get bigger than 50 people, or?
Oh yes, it got huge. I don't know how many people actually lived with them. I would guess maybe up to 1,000. But then they had a magazine called Cornerstone, which was of course a takeoff of Rolling Stone, and it started off as like a little underground magazine, and it grew and grew and grew, and it became as large, as big as the Rolling Stone in size. It was a large, beautiful magazine.
How many people was it distributed to?
A lot. It was the major Christian young people magazine.
Interesting.
Plus, they had a festival called Cornerstone Festival, so they became very hugely powerful.
And this is how they raised money too. I mean, how did they their financial situation? How did they bolster that?
Well, the Chicago Tribune eventually outed them in 2000. There was a lot of us, trying to expose them, but they were exposed in the Tribune for taking total advantage of their workers. The workers had no workman's comp. There were injuries. There was even a death, I believe. I can't remember exactly. Many people left the Jesus People USA. They formed their own group called the Ex-Jesus People.
Right, so there's like a splinter group.
Well, to support themselves, yeah.
Right. I mean, can you go back to your relationship? I mean, you basically were a member of that church, is that correct? Or were you just a kind of...
No,
You're just your
no, by the grace of God, I didn't join. But my first husband lived with them before we married. Now, he is dead.
Gotcha.
And I think there's a correlation there because it was such a bad experience. Most of my friends that have been members of Jesus People are in bad shape today, if they're alive.
And how did the kind of abuse and how did the group fall apart?
Well, they practiced a thing in the 70s called the shepherding. It was part of the shepherding movement, which was that you had to get permission to get married. You had to get permission to go out. You couldn't buy anything. You had a buddy system. This is similar to the Unification Church and other cults.
Yeah, that's true. So was this all kind of managed by at the top from Don Herron or the Herron family?
Yes,
okay,
yes,
so.
it was the Herron family, and
Gotcha.
they've been criticized by many people besides myself for that factor.
Gotcha. And so they tried to maintain total control. And did they have mass weddings like the Moonies?
No,
Okay.
But they did marry people off pretty quickly, and there's a lot of complaints about that.
Gotcha.
And there was adult spanking.
Can you talk about
in other
that?
words, I'm sorry?
Tell me about that.
Well, if the council, which was Herons and their spouses or close buddies, they would bring you in, and if you had done something wrong, like stolen or lied or eaten a candy bar without permission, they would give you a spanking they called it getting the rod. It was you would get spanked with
in front of everybody.
Yeah, it wasn't naked, but
Sounds like a
I mean, nobody.
fraternity ritual or something.
Well, it was something people submitted to willingly. I mean, it wasn't sexual, but it was certainly,
Did the group kind of try to like restrict calories so that people were more pliable? Is that kind of what you're telling me?
Well, I'm sure they had good food if they could get it. That's a good point, maybe. But certainly they were all broke. Certainly they didn't eat well.
So there's a lot of poverty. Less interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the group no longer exists to this day, correct?
It does exist.
It does exist.
With all the people that have tried to out them and bust them, they're still operating, but they're a skeleton of what they were.
Gotcha.
The magazine is gone. The festival is gone.
Gotcha. When do you think they reached their peak?
Some of them should be in jail.
Right.
I don't think anyone's gone to jail, but most of us think they should have gone to jail.
When do you think the group really peaked in kind of popularity and members?
Well, politically, they still have their property. They have a lot of property. But in terms of popularity, I would say pre-2000.
Interesting, gotcha. So they were still active in the mid-'80s and early '90s and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And talk about the abuse. I mean, the documentary, which I was unable to get through the entire thing. Can you restate the title of it again?
Well, it's called No Place to Call Home.
And then, so was the abuse just an element of the entire group? That was something that was happening often?
Apparently. Now, this is interesting. I did all my investigation and my interviews in 90, 91, 92. And I did hear some rumors about sexual abuse, but I didn't include it in my book. I was mostly concerned about emotional abuse. And then the next thing that happened on the timeline was a famous Christian author named Professor Ron Enroth wrote a book called Churches That Abuse, and he included an entire chapter about the Jesus People USA. And but since then, in the last, I would say, 5 years, one of the, to me, kids, the Jesus People kids, did his own movie because he was molested there, and he interviewed a lot of young people that had been molested.
Yeah, it seems like it was endemic from the documentary.
Apparently, yeah. Much worse than I had any idea, yeah.
And they were tied to other kind of groups, you said, is that right?
Well, there's connections between the Jesus People USA and Children of God. Somebody needs to nail that down better than I've been able to do, but
can you talk about those connections? What are the connections?
Well, some of the same leadership. It hasn't been confirmed.
Gotcha. Interesting. And tell me more about your research when you were writing your book that wasn't published. You kind of came across other kind of characters other than the Underwegers or Debbie Nathan. Isn't that correct?
Well, let me explain why I wrote the book.
Okay.
I was going to say in Christian circles we have this thing called doing apologetics, and I guess you could say I had an apologetics ministry, which means that we studied sort of comparative religions. Okay. And we can tell you the difference between the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Unification Church. Okay, fine.
Right.
Well, what in that line of work, I did notice I never liked the Jesus People after what they did to my first husband, nor my current husband, who also joined them briefly, nor my other friends. I did not like them, did not approve of them, but that was about all I knew. I didn't like the direction they were going. They turned from classic rock music into punk rock, and they were just going in a bad direction doctrinally in every way. But that was about all I knew about them. I wouldn't have classified them as a cult. I would have not doctrinally, I would have classified them behaviorally as a cult.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
But here's what happened was they began to attack ministries that I approved of and ministries that I liked. For example, they attacked Mike Warnke, who was a Christian comedian, and he had been a Satanist, and he wrote a book that came out in the late 70s called The Satan Seller. And it was a good book, and it warned people about the occult. And everyone admired him and liked the book. They attacked him and the book and said he was a fraud. And then they attacked...
And they did that in the Cornerstone, right? In the magazine,
yes,
in the church. Jesus People magazine was Cornerstone.
Right.
So I got you. Okay.
But I have done a timeline of attacks on ex-Satanists, you would say. And really did you ever hear of John Todd? Most conspiracy people, okay.
Very much.
Well,
I think a lot of this audience probably knows of the name. John Todd was supposedly from a Illuminati or high-level witch family, right? He left that recording. Gotcha.
Right. I'm glad you. No, yeah. Well, they attacked him first. Actually, that's and then they attacked Warnke, and then they attacked Warren Stratford, who wrote Satan's Underground, which was a big best-selling book in the Christian community. I don't know when it came out. I'd say, yeah, Satan's Underground. It probably came out around 85. They attacked not everyone, but many of the better ministries that were trying to warn people about sexual abuse of children via ritualistic, etc.
Gotcha.
And that made me wonder what is going on over there. So that's what made me investigate them.
I see. So they were investigating people you felt were credible, providing credible testimony of Satanism.
Exactly, and nobody can vouch for I mean, I'm sure there. I don't know what to think about Mike Warnke, even though I talked to him on the phone, and I knew Warren Stratford very well by phone, extremely well. I still don't know what to think. It's hard to prove your own credentials. If I could prove mine, but I'm an unusual case. Most people don't. It's not that easy to prove things.
Gotcha.
But they had unlimited money to go after these people, and now I see that. Let me give you an example. There's a book, Jesus People USA claimed to be Christian, but they began to use a lot of very questionable people to reference their attacks on other Christian ministries. So there was a book called Satanism in America, and it was written by Sean Carlson and Gerald LaRue, and it was called How the Devil Got Much More Than His Due. This is a book that came out in 1989, and they made it's very simplistic here. They accused anyone who believed in conspiracy theories or Satanism of being 1, insane, 2, extremist Christian, 3, after money, or 4, trying to overcome their guilt. So there was a complete ad hominem attack on anyone that thought Satanism was a problem. Okay, so then they have a list of experts, according to themselves. Now, this is a pro-Satanist, pro-sympathizing the devil list of experts. So they have Kenneth Lanning. I'm going to read ones that I think you know.
I know.
J. Gordon Melton, who's a very interesting vampire-loving, supposedly Lutheran minister. They don't have Underwager on here, but he would be in there.
Interesting.
They have their list of experts, which most of these you wouldn't recognize. Then they have the list of non-experts. In other words, people that you should not listen to because they're idiots.
Gotcha.
And they have many of my favorite ministries on here, including John Todd. They don't have Mike Warnke. They've got Johanna Michelson, who's got excellent credentials and references. Do you know who she is?
Yeah, she's still around.
Okay.
I think she's still
yeah.
around.
She wrote The Beautiful Side of Evil.
Right.
They really can't touch her. Right. They've got Tex Mars on here. Josh McDowell, who's an apologist, a best-selling author. Actually, he finally came out and said that he had been a victim of pedophilia himself. So they're just trashing this list of people that were coming out of Satanism.
Right. And the
Ted
people
Gunderson, Ted Gunderson, they say he's a non-expert, so like that.
Gunderson was around. I mean, people have said some things about his questionable character, but he definitely made public statements, and he was in the mix. I mean, with Martin and all those other things. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Just wanted to let people know that all my books are available signed at my website at www.occultinvestigations.com. This interview will be posted on my YouTube channel at William Ramsey Investigates, and I also have other videos there pertaining to the West Memphis 3 case, as well as videos about Aleister Crowley and his modern followers. So let's return to the show with Camille Blinstrub. Thank you. Hi, this is William Ramsey. We're back. Me and Camille took a tiny little break, so we both have our water refreshed. So Camille, we were talking about kind of the bunch of people who you considered legitimate researchers who had been persecuted by the Jesus People book or magazine Cornerstone. And we were just kind of talking about that, but you happen to have some information about Constance Cumby. She wrote the book, The Dangers of the Rainbow, is that correct? Or something about the rainbow, does that sound right?
Yeah, I think it's The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow. It's been Hidden Dangers of the New Age. It's been a while. Yeah. But yeah, and she is a lawyer, and she was one of the first people to start questioning the Jesus People. When I began to do my research in 1991, I believe, the fall, a lot of people began feeding me information, like just grassroots people.
It happens to me all the time. I get all kinds of stuff. Some is good and some isn't, but I've gotten some superb information from people. I have no idea how they got my name, where they came from, but yeah, sorry. No,
exactly. And I was saying, if one thing I learned from dealing with Cornerstone, it was a David and Goliath thing for me, because they were at their peak and I was a nobody. And still am, actually. But I learned to make sure to get my facts straight. I don't know if I did. I don't think I did as well as Ross Chiat, but I learned that, and so I was very careful. But I was warned, and she was one of the people that warned against the Jesus People. She was stalked by them, not sexually. She was stalked when she began to criticize them, which they were known for their brutality, their competitiveness amongst other apologetics ministries. That's how I guess that's how they got big. But there's money. There must be money that was poured into them.
Do you think that they got money from nonprofits or some kind of grants or to survive, or how do you think that they made their income? Did they recruit rich members?
Not so much. They made money. That's disgusting what they did. They made money off of poor people who went out and did drywalling and wood stripping and painting for them, and they lived in poverty. And then the upper, in roofing, the upper people lived better. And but I suspect them as I have to wonder if they're not infiltrated part of the CIA, or I don't know.
Well, you never know. Some of those groups do. I mean, if you look through Jim Jones and some of these other people, there's an intelligence background, or there's somebody who's there who's kind of behind the scenes helping them out. And L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, the intelligence ties are, if you do the research, it's there. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's hard to pin down. I mean, none of those people will ever discuss their intelligence background. But what kind of abuse did they hurl at Constance Cumby?
Well, they stalked her. Like for example, if she was going to speak somewhere, they would go in to the venue ahead of time and put pamphlets on all the folding chairs saying that she was a liar, or that criticizing her in some fashion. That's what I was told by her ministry. And she was, I wouldn't say she was afraid of them, but everyone, all the people that gave me good info about Cornerstone and Jesus People USA. Many people were afraid of them.
Interesting. And so, what happened as far as the Jesus People and their antagonists? I mean, did they have a lot of competition with other churches in the Chicago area? Did they have tendrils that spread out from the Midwest, or were they strictly a Chicago group?
That's a good question. As far as the commune, the brick and mortar, they were Chicago. Mm-hmm. Their influence was huge through contemporary Christian music and through their magazine. They were the number one. They were the Rolling Stone of Christian young youth, as I said. But here's something interesting. Now, I know that you're following your readership or whatever. They're aware of the Masons as being a problem.
Absolutely.
Well, we have to back up in Christian history here a little bit, and of course you could find problems with the church all the way back. You could find problems with the Catholics, and there were Jesuits involved in the early Jesus People. My present husband, who also was with Jesus People, saw them introduce Jesuits to speak. But if you study the new evangelicals, there was a break in the American church in the 30s. It was the fundamentalists went one direction and the modernists went another direction. Mm-hmm. And then there was another group called the New Evangelicals, and that's Christianity Today, and that's Billy Graham. Mm-hmm. And Billy Graham, there are many videos exposing him as being apostate and possibly having connections to Masonry and the Pope, etc. So
I mean, I've heard that he's a 33rd degree Mason.
Yeah,
which isn't hard to believe.
Just looking at it black and white, what prints out, he does not stay faithful to the fundamentals of the Bible. He's ecumenical. There's a lot of problems with him, but I'm trying to say that before the Jesus People, before the hippie movement, mm-hmm. I believe that the church was infiltrated earlier in the 40s, 30s, and Christianity Today promoted Jesus People USA.
Interesting.
Jesus People USA was promoted by the big boys of the church. Uh-huh. They were promoted by Hank Hanegraaff at Christian Research Institute. These mm-hmm. are huge mainline Christian ministries.
Gotcha. And would the Jesus People USA consider themselves non-denominational? Or how would they would say non-denominational right. evangelist, or how would they define themselves?
Well, they started off being, it's a very, I think it came out of a think tank myself. Mm-hmm. I just, in hindsight, I just think they're something that...
What's the background of the Herons? Did they just pop up out of nowhere, or were they in government, or what was their kind of, how did they get involved in starting Jesus People?
Well, unfortunately, the Church of Jesus Christ is riddled with phonies mm-hmm. and con men. This is a fact, and John Heron was a womanizer. He was, that's according to their own history.
Interesting.
I mean, that's not me making that up. That's what they say. Dawn Heron, as I said, I interviewed her. A lot of people find fault with her and think that she was a dominatrix over there. They had nepotism in the family, etc. She did, if I recall, her family had been in the orphanage business. I don't know how these people get chosen to do these things, but I think the whole thing is highly questionable.
Did they have any type of training or religious or theological training from a college or anything?
That's a good question. In the beginning, no. Everything was just counterculture. You had Bible lessons, lots of church, and it was training. People would join the ministry and live with them in order to be trained. And I must say, my first husband was he really was excellent at preaching and witnessing. Mm-hmm. But as time went by, as they apparently wanted to become more powerful in a secular fashion, they became politically connected, and they also joined the Covenant denomination.
Interesting. What's the Covenant denomination? What was that? What's that about?
Well, that's a mainline. I think they may be Swedish, but they had a lot of money. And actually, some of the people that came to me and were concerned about the Jesus people were grassroots Covenant Church people that didn't like the looks of these hippies, not because they had long hair, but because they suspected that there was something, amiss.
Interesting. And the politicians, did they kind of solicit the Daley family, or were there any names that people would recognize from Chicago?
A famous alderwoman from Chicago that I can't remember. Jesus People USA. I think it's Alderman Schiller, Helen Schiller. It's been many decades since I studied these people, but trust me, they are very powerful in uptown Chicago, which is a regentrified part of Chicago.
Gotcha.
They
so
must
it's uptown
be
from
quite
downtown,
wealthy.
correct?
Uptown.
Gotcha. Interesting. And so when you did your research on them, I've seen some of your writings and things like that, very interesting. What happened, these connections to these people who denied the occult and these pedophile apologists? How did you get across? I mean, it's interesting that you use the term satanic panic, because I came across that in West Memphis 3. It's some kind of loaded term that's like conspiracy theorists, that really doesn't mean what it says. It's just something to minimize people's concerns. Oh, you're in a panic, you're not rational, your research doesn't have merit, there's no facts or evidence in there. So I do find it interesting that you came across these types of people. And could you talk a little bit more about them?
Sure. Well,
it's like the
Ross
skeptic.
Chiat, they appear to be a team. I mean, they're loosely connected.
Through what?
They appear to be in collusion. These I call it Cornerstone and Friends.
Gotcha.
Because that's all I knew at the time. Ross Chiat has brought other players to my attention.
Any names that people would recognize?
Well, they had Nightline doing sympathetic pieces. It's probably the same bunch of people that you would recognize from the West Memphis thing. It was Underwager, it was Christianity Today, it was Cornerstone, it was Greg and Gretchen Pasatino.
Can you talk about them? Who are the Pasatinos?
Okay, the Pasatinos were Lutherans who were writers, and they're both passed away now. They wrote articles about satanic ritual abuse being basically a hoax. And Christians believed them. Then Debbie Nathan was a secular writer. She's still writing. Ross Chiat has a big problem with her. She mocked the McMartin case. She helped set people free, basically. She wrote a book, I think it's called Satan's Silence. This was after my time of research, but where she basically dedicated the book, herself and her co-author dedicated the book to a list of people that they said had been falsely imprisoned or falsely accused. And
who was on that list?
I was, I'm pretty sure a fellow named Fuster was on there. I
Gerald
don't
Suster?
have. I think so. I'd have to get that for you, and I can give you that information
I would
later.
love to see that. If it's Gerald Suster, that would be quite a statement, because I actually include Suster in my book Children of the Beast and do a couple of pages on him, because he was persecuted, but he openly stated that he was a Crowley follower and drank blood So if they're stating that he got persecuted unjustly, that would be remarkable. And also the kind of notion of persecution or false persecution was a theme that is interwoven in the West Memphis 3 events. You know, a lot of the public say these people are falsely accused. It's a witch hunt is another term that they bandy about. Oh, it's a witch hunt. Well, you might be a witch. And it's just interesting that they called it a witch hunt. And what does Damien Eccles do right after he gets out of jail? Is moves to Salem, Massachusetts, the place where the true Salem witch trials took place. So anyway,
what name did you give me just a second
Gerald
ago?
Suster.
I don't know if that's this man that I'm saying. It's F-U. I believe it's Frank Fuster. F-U-S-T-R. He was accused of pedophilia, and I have to refer people to Professor Chiat's book. Mm-hmm. It is so shocking. I thought I knew a lot about this, and he has just turned my head around completely. I cannot believe the audacity of these people like Debbie Nathan and Dorothy Rabinowitz and Cornerstone and Friends and all their media buddies. I cannot believe how audacious, their audacity in the lying and the misrepresenting. You have to have your readers and your following look at this man's book.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look. I know it's had some really positive response. I just haven't had the time to read it, unfortunately. But yeah, I think Fuster was this guy who was supposedly involved in pedophilia and all kinds of nasty stuff in Florida, and that was supposedly one of these,
Dade County, right?
Yeah, he was up to no good, and I think people were trying to say that it was a witch hunt or it was unnecessary, but a lot of people gave testimony that he was up to no good. So,
well, what Chiat proves though is that he's very, very cautious. He bends over backwards because that's how you have to be when you deal with Cornerstone and Friends. Of course, Cornerstone, thank God, is gone, but these other apologists for evil, I call them. But it's just incredible what he's come up with in this book. Do
you remember what other cases he covers other than Fuster?
He covers the McMartin in depth, Dade County, the Country Walk, the Kelly Michaels case in New Jersey.
What's the Kelly Michaels case? Can you talk about that?
That was a case that the Village Voice. This woman was. I don't have all the facts handy. I believe she was found guilty, and then because of sympathetic people, the verdict was overruled or thrown over, and she's free. And no one wants to see any innocent person go to jail. Right. That's not the point. But what Professor Chiat shows is how many of these people that have been accused and how many of these cases are really quite frightening. The medical evidence that has been treated so dismissively by the apologists for this stuff.
Right. And as far as Chiat's work is concerned, I mean, have you seen any other cases that he covered?
Well,
that people would know?
He covers dozens of cases. He is a victim of pedophilia himself.
Interesting. And he admits
Did
that
you
in the
know
book?
that?
No.
Yes, he does. He does mention that. And I believe he had a lawsuit with Debbie Nathan.
Interesting.
The chickens are really coming home to roost. Now, he covers 4 things in a chapter called History Ignored. He covers the so-called hysteria, right. And he proves that was not the case. Mm-hmm. He proves that there was not hysteria, that parents were not going out of their minds. And if they had, would anyone really wonder? But yes, there were some people that were very upset, but by and large, he proves point by point that there was nothing coming close to hysteria. Then he deals with the subject called fantastic accusations.
Mm-hmm.
Like if children say that that there was blood or witches or defecation or something like that, almost out of hand. These charges are rejected out of hand quite often, simply because they're supposedly fantastic. Then there's the question of children being witnesses. Are children able to be good witnesses? And this Professor Chiat really proves that by and large, children can be counted upon to be good witnesses. Now,
Right.
this is something that Debbie Nathan and her crowd, they refute that. They and Underwager, they say children are impressionable and that they cannot be trusted as
proper
witnesses.
Witnesses.
Yeah.
Right.
So this basically, but you have to ask yourself if children are, if you accept that, then are you not leaving them defenseless? I mean, but he goes beyond that and proves that children actually are good witnesses.
Interesting.
And then he talks about the child porn myth. This is another thing that the apologists like to throw around. That they can't throw it around now, but they threw it around in the 80s. That there was no that there wasn't that much child porn, and there wasn't child porn being done at daycare centers.
Interesting.
And so this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that they made that argument. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So we're kind of coming to the end. We got about another 5 minutes. Is there anything else you want to cover or anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, I basically want someone to link all these things together, and I appeal to all researchers. I would like to see, first of all, what shocked me was that when I went online trying to find the articles attacking and destroying Mike Warnke, who he is still alive, and Lawrence Stratford and Johanna Michelson and all these other people, Cornerstone's really slipping away, probably because they're guilty as sin. So there's not a big footprint on the net anymore. They used to be huge. Now they're almost disappearing. Mm-hmm. And it could be because of charges pending against them. But this whole thing has to be dovetailed. All this information has to be warehoused together so that we can find out, is there a conspiracy going on here? Are these people colluding? Are they working together? And why? And all of this is so behind the fact. I mean, it's great that Professor Chiat did this, and he proved that these people were, a lot of them were guilty, and a lot of them deserve to be in jail, frankly. Right. And that's his opinion, and it's my opinion. But the question is, now we've had Jimmy Savile in England, right, which I know you're aware of.
Very
now we've had Sandusky in Penn State,
right, yep,
and the Catholic Church. This is all since then. So the question is, what's going on now? Right. What are being done to children now? And we're all 20 years behind what's going on.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's a scary question. I mean, if all that's going on, if you look at the Savile case, it wasn't just him. It was almost a significant, if not larger than 50% proportion of cultural elite or political elite were involved in all that stuff. It's
right.
ugly.
It was prime ministers,
Lords, all kinds of
Westminster,
MPs, members of Parliament, and they're
Dawson
covering up
Square.
for each other. And that one lady got shot in front of her house. She was investigating.
Right, Jill Dando.
Jill Dando, yeah. I mean, just a pro job, like a professional hit, not something. Somebody came up, probably a 2 or 3 man team. So that's ugly, and I think that's what they were trying to cover up. Is it went even uglier? What came out about Savile? I bet it's worse. I know some people have made the allegation that he knew serial killers.
Well, he did know them.
He knew them, right?
He's actually suspected of possibly being in on the Yorkshire
Ripper,
Ripper case. One more thing I want to bring to your attention is the English writer Jason Horsley. Mm-hmm. He is doing very excellent work exposing, tying all these things in together with Common Core, because really we may be doing too little too late.
Interesting. And tell me more about Horsley. Common Core is part of what?
Well, Common Core is our education system. And we're all up in arms, and we should be, about children being abducted, tortured, raped, killed, possibly in England, possibly allegedly by cabinet members. Okay, but what is being done every day in American schools, and the Common Core is not just going to be for America, it's going to be for the world.
Right.
What is going on in the school systems? Are the children are being brainwashed. The Common Core is reducing everyone to complicity to serfdom. This is, and then we will have no defense whatsoever against anything and everything they want to do to us.
Excellent point. That's a good way to end it. So, Camille Blinstrub, where can people find you? Give us your contact information if anybody wants to reach out or ask you any questions.
I have a YouTube channel called Camille Davis Russo, and I publish a lot of stuff publicly on Facebook, Camille Blinstrub.
Okay, and it's Blinstrub, correct?
That's right.
Awesome. Camille Blinstrub, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.